Good morning. This is a steel tank that I am preparing for my training class. It's actually made out of this styrene and I dimpled it up. And so I'm going to show you how to do that. But what this is for is this is like a training model that I use during my training classes. And what we're actually training is these puddles. I'm trying to do a puddle that kind of dribbles down the side of the tank and then gathers into this grass. And so that's what we're going to be working on this week. And I'm going to show you how I made this training aid. This is a piece of thin styrene, and I just used my heat gun to get this kind of a dimpled finish on it. But let's back up and tell you what I'm trying to do. So tomorrow I'm giving a class, one of my coaching classes with Bob, about how to do, water that's been dripping off of like a stock tank. And his is corrugated, and I had some corrugated, it's that thick aluminum kind of stuff, and I cannot find it. I have been all over the shop. So there's the problem. I need to give this coach tomorrow, and I knew I had this material, and I couldn't find it. So now I'm switching to something else, and I think it's going to work out really nice. So how to get here? Well, the first thing I thought was, okay, I'm going to try to make corrugated. And see that line right there is me taking this thin stuff, and I don't know why I didn't go grab some of that aluminum stuff, over here to my metal brake. And I figured, well, maybe I could do my brake on this, and get that kind of a, wavy pattern that you have in corrugated metal. And then, but man, I put it in there, and because this is form metal, and just the test was horrible. You see what it did. And if I had to flip this over every time, man, it would not be even. It would just be terrible. Because I've seen people before where they'll take like old drill bits. You'll take like a bunch of the same size drill bit, and you like line them up, and then you like press the foil down into it, and that gives you the corrugated. But I don't have that. And so anyway, so that didn't work. But then I remembered, I could maybe just take this thing and melt it and just use, make it look like a steel stock tank, which is, just not corrugated sides. To get there, I have this. This is like an old, like an oxygen bottle or acetylene. I think green is oxygen. And so it had been cut off. And I've used it for years for just different stuff, like for shaping. That's why it's all been cleaned off here and stuff. So I thought, if I heated this thing up, and then this is before it was all dimply like that, I could put this around it, and it would, get that shape. And I was just thinking a smooth, round shape. Well, I did that. So I used my heat gun. And I heated this sucker up, and I kind of, I did it from inside so it would have more heat, hopefully more evenly distributed. And I had my hand out here, to kind of feel, and when I couldn't keep my hand on there anymore, that's when I figured, that'll be enough. So then I took this and I put it on there again. It had no dimpling at that point. And I put that on there, and I continued to heat inside until I couldn't feel or I couldn't hold my hand there anymore. And then I stopped heating, and then I kind of just switched hands back and forth and stuff like that to see if it would hold that shape. Let it cool down a bit, and it didn't do a darn thing. I mean, it did not. It was just flat as a pancake as soon as it came off. It did not form whatsoever. So I'm like, oh, heck. So then I just, okay, I'm going to get, Cro-Magnon on this thing. And that's when I kind of I held like this, and I just hit that sucker at full, and then it started dimpling. And then really heating it up. And then I got this. Now, you may not think this is all that brilliant. Like, why are you going on about this? Well, I'll tell you, I've seen old metal, old rusted steel, tanks and stuff like that. And this is what they look like. Now, it's white, of course. I got to rust it. I got to paint it, but that's what's coming next. But Man, I got to tell you, this is going to look really, really cool. Well, if I don't fail, the basis is here for a really cool stock tank. And so I'm going to cut it, I don't know, there, and I'll take the best part. You know, I don't want it too high because this is for cattle, you know, to come up and drink out of. And but it's going to be really rusted up. I got to put a rim around the top. I got to do a whole bunch of work to it. But this was really quite fun. And so that's how I did it. And I'm telling you, like when I said I was on it, I was doing it like I can't do it now just because, you know, on the phone here. But I was like this close to it and really watching the light so I could dimple it. But anyway, I'm going to paint this thing up. I hope I don't screw it up, and I hope I get a really nice pattern for it, because to get that, I think that's just going to be a brilliant looking steel, beat up, rusted, old stock tank, you know. So anyway, let's see if I can pull this thing off. Now I love this ruler for my straight edge, and I'm going to use this to cut this. Because it's got cork on the bottom, and it really grips that, because as you're cutting these longer cuts on this styrene, you know, if it should grab or something like that, and you don't have cork on the bottom of your ruler, you know, it'll shift and stuff. So that's my best advice, I guess, here is use a ruler with cork on the bottom, grips what you're cutting, and then multiple passes does just a perfect job. Okay, so now this is for the top. This is half round styrene that I'm going to put around the top edge. And it's supposed to represent like the rolled steel for the lip. You know, you don't want like just a sharp lip. So I'm putting this on here, and it was out of frame. I apologize for that. So I'm just speeding this up through here so you can see. But you'll see clearly here in a second how it's on there. And once that was all on, you know, I just used spot glue as I was doing it. But now I take my glue and then go all the way around the edge. And that makes it really nice and secure. And I need that because I'm going to come back and sand and file that edge later so it looks like a nice, you know, rounded steel edge at the top. Now I'll add this little seam, and I don't have any of this, so I use some U-channel, some U-shaped channel, and here I'm just going to cut one side of it off with my shoulder plane, and it'll kind of create an L pattern, and that's what I'll use for that seam. Now I don't want to put this on here, this little seam on here, without a little bit of aging. So here's my special trick. I just take it and do that. It's not that big a deal, but you know, with older stuff, you do have to be a lot a lot more careful, because it will crack, it will break, but this is, you know, I just bought this, so it works pretty good. Now to finally find that place where I'm going to have this placed at, I'm really actually trying to find a place where I think I'm going to get the most use out of the dimpling that's in the plastic styrene, as well as how it matches that little wonky thing I did with the little seam there. This is the piece I cut off. The other piece is over here drying. So, but I want to test something on this piece. You know, at the bottom of something that's pretty old, it can kind of bow out just a little bit, and I want to see if I can do that. So this is a ball peen hammer, and I am just going to see if by running this along here, I can create a bulge in this base. I don't know. It worked. So I don't know if you can see that in the light, if there's enough shadow there, but it did work. So it creates a slight bulge at the bottom. So once that is dry, which has probably got to be pretty darn soon, I got to do that. Okay. So get there. And right there. There we go. So there is our stock tank. I am going to get some bolts. Let's get a few bolts on here. See how well we do. Deal here. I think I can do it here. Get a nice little bulge at the bottom. I thought about this, and I think this is how I kind of, I'm just going to throw in some good old scenic glue. So now what I'm going to do here is kind of want to not have a glob. Now this is not to be seen. This is part of the cutaway. And but what I do want to do is I want to kind of bring it in here. I am going to put a little bit of sanded grout on there, and the reason is the sanded grout will create a little bit more adhesion, and also kind of give it a solid backing, you know, just that little bit. This is my small scooper, and I had somebody ask about this the other day. It was really cool. What it is it's just a piece of brass, okay, and I cut it off at a sharp angle. Then I took it, I think I did this one on the grinder, or actually no, I think I did this on the belt sander. And then I sanded that down, and then here I used a file to get that side. But once it was done, then I turned a little handle here, super glued it in there, and bada bing. Now the longer this is, you could graduate this thing so you know exactly how much is in it, but I just kind of did it so it held a good amount. And so I'm going to take some of this sifted, so you see when you tip it back, it can hold a specific amount. But the nice thing about this is, and I like doing it this way, is I can hold it like this, and then by tapping the end of it, I get a real easy little bit going out at a time, a very, very controlled manner. And then I can make sure it goes exactly where I want. Okay. There we go. So that has some gluing power right now, but it's not set at all. So I am going to now spray this with some denatured alcohol. Now, I looked this up. Denatured alcohol is the best for this. I have been using whatever, isopropyl or denatured, but in fact, denatured alcohol is better for this, and I've got a little informational thing on it. Yeah, so there's a comparison there of denatured and isopropyl. And what that does is it breaks the surface tension of that powder, allowing that glue to come up into it. The last thing I'll do is I'll use some thinned Mod Podge and water, and I'm going to drip that in there. It's just only going to take a little bit, and then with the alcohol, again, that is then going to soak in to all of that sanded grout that I put there, and that is going to make a real nice backer for this. And we'll do pretty much the same effect on the front, but I want to get the back done and dry first. So now I'm going to get the excess off here. Put a little bit of grass down here. And, you can use Mod Podge for glass, but this scenic glue works just fine. And it's going to be kind of spotty. When you're doing static grass, you do want enough of this. You don't want it to dry out on you. You want this to be a healthy amount of glue. Then here's the static grass, and we're going to use burnt. And here we go. By kind of squeezing the sides, that generates somehow a little bit of this static and helps it stand up. And it is. It totally is. Okay, so I'm going to get it pretty thick on there. It looks like I did a fine job. Then I'm going to let that sit for a little bit. That doesn't hurt. Then I'm going to vacuum the top because I don't want all of it. I just want what's stuck, and you'd be surprised how little you need for that to make actually a good effect. We're finally ready to paint. So we start off with this black, flat black base, and then I'm going to use Vallejo White Gray to add scratches. And so what these scratches are is they're going to show up later when we use colors. And I'm dry brushing with just the tips of the brush. And these are pretty heavy, as you can tell. And they're making these real visible scratches in what's going to be the steel. I'm going to change direction now. And instead of just the tips, I'm kind of using the whole brush, like the heel of the brush. And I'm trying to get like the dents and the buckling and the general look of the steel that's gonna be under. Even though this is the very first bit of paint we've got over the black base coat here, I'm still defining a lot of details like the textures, the scratches that we'll see all the way at the end. Okay, so this is some Vallejo Light Rust, and I'm gonna keep this in kind of the same areas where I did the heaviest work with the white gray previously. This adds a little bit of depth. It adds some variation to the color, and when I've got enough on there, where I think it looks pretty good, I'm gonna come back with a little bit more of that white gray. And this is something that I do a lot while I'm painting. I'll go in with one color, the white gray. Then I went to the light rust, and then I come back to the light gray. And you'll notice my brush has still got a little bit of that light gray in it. So what I'm doing is I'm just dipping right into that white gray, picking it up, bringing it back over to the piece. And when I start painting, it's a variation of the two colors that I've painted on it so far. So it's like a natural tone change. Green yellow is supposed to represent not the steel, but the environmental factors, kind of like mold or mildew or anything biological that could find kind of like a shadow, because that's where they're not going to be on the southern side of the tank. They're going to be on the northern side of the tank where the shadow is going to be, and most often, and so that's going to allow for a little bit of biology to grow in there. Now the black, or it's not black. I mean, it's German camouflage brown, black brown is the color. But what it does is now this is going to represent the deepness, the dark stuff, almost the wet stuff that's coming up. The whole painting process here is about layers and adding different colors in different areas to layer in these things that give color changes. It's about contrast on one point, the early on stuff we did, you can still see those scratches underneath the paint. But then it's about kind of blending, and that's what this dry brush does. This taking this with dry blending, not wanting to make it fully integrated. I'm not trying to change the color. I want this to be thin over the top. So now we can look at it. It's basically painted here. And this is what I was talking about before. Here and here, you can see some of those scratches underneath the paint that we put on here. The highlighted areas, I mean, there's some shine there, but they look like steel. So now we're going to start with detailing the steel and bringing in kind of the corrosive, the water that's lapping over the edges, the stuff that's running down. It's got a feed. There's a water pipe, so this pump is bringing it up out of the ground. And when it brings that water out of the ground, a lot of times it's going to contain some minerals. That's what this white represents. The white is the mineral that calcifies. Basically, it's just buildup of different minerals that come from the water continuously lapping over the edge of this thing as it continuously is filled again and again and again. So the water inside is clean and beautiful and nice, but on the outside, because it just stays wet, it interacts with all this other stuff. So that's what these streaks are about. So again, with this whole layering thing, even though I'm putting in an awful lot of white here, and you're thinking, wow, that's a lot, I'm going to be putting colors over the top of this. And even I'm going to come back with that German camouflage black brown. And that's going to kind of define the wettest points of it, where the water is physically flowing or the water is physically pooling at the bottom. The shadow and the plants at the base of the tank are kind of holding that moisture there. And so that's why it's super dark. It's dark because of the moisture. So now we're going to kind of concentrate on what I consider the focal point, the painting focal point, if nothing else. I'm doing the background again, starting with the white, but this is going to be like the main area that the water is kind of coming down in a continuous stream. These other areas may happen if there's like a stick ever flows in, or there's a leaf or something like that, and water gets diverted. That's like that one on the left that I just painted, where it's dark in the middle. But this is going to be the main feature. And the nice thing is I've got some things to work with here. There's the little dimple just above halfway up. And I want to accent that. I want other people to see that is affecting the water. And that's what all that is. On the bottom, we still have a little bit of a bulge. It's kind of hard to see, but there is a bulge all the way around the base of this. And we'll use obviously just like some regular water at one point. I'll let dribble down here and see how it flows. But for now, the goal is to really just highlight the high and low areas. And remember, this white is the basis for the other paints that I'm going to be painting on top of it. So I'm not too worried if I get too much here. Now this German camouflage black-brown is going to be like where the actual water is going to flow the most. And this is based off of when I was a kid. There was a farm near us, and there was water that flowed out of this, and maybe not all the time, but as it did, the track that it took, that was like really, I don't know, it had this moss and this green kind of, I don't know, stuff, but it was really dark. But then on the edges, it had, this calcification, this, I don't know what it was, honestly, but, I looked it up, and it's basically calcium and magnesium is where most water scale and lime comes from. But at the time, I was just like, wow, that's really kind of cool how this stuff over here kind of dries and creates this track almost for this little slime trail or whatever it was, to kind of go down. And I just thought that was neat. And so that's what I'm recreating here. So I'm using the greens, I'm using the dark black brown to show the wettest areas. And I'm going to continue this all throughout, where I've been putting this white, because the white, the deposits, the dried calcium deposits, all that kind of stuff, that is all built up over time, where it just gets enough moisture to grow, and the other stuff doesn't get it, because that's where it stops. So it's kind of on the fringes of where the highest moisture is. Now, I did this actually about a week ago is when I painted this, and I've been working on the video ever since. And it's kind of funny to watch yourself paint, because when I see that I'm working on something on the screen, I'm thinking I might go further with where I do. or where I did on video. But I realized that I did later. And you'll see that here as well. I don't always finish everything that maybe you think I'm finishing. You know, I'm painting on this one area, and you're starting to see that it's starting to resemble something. And if I just went a little bit further, it would resemble something. Then I stop, and then I go somewhere else and paint. Well, that's kind of the point. I don't have any professional paint training whatsoever. So, and if I ever watched a video about it, I'd probably get really embarrassed by this. But what I do is I paint what I think it's going to look like. And just like I explained, as soon as I think I've kind of got it, then it's time to move on, because I want your viewing of it and your brain's interpretation of it to finish that image. And that's something that I've heard for years now with matte painters and things like that. You know, they're not so much concerned with an exact image in the background of a shot, you know, in these great shots like in Star Wars and things like that, where they use matte painting in the background to, you know, simulate something that they today use with CGI. But these matte painters said, look, you get really close to this thing, and you'll notice that it doesn't look exact at all. It's just suggestions. But it is those suggestions that I think really make it more realistic, at least for me. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to make suggestions. I'm not trying to teach you how to paint, because I don't know how to paint, but I am just trying to get this to a point where your imagination takes over and says, hey, that kind of looks like, and that's where I stop. And then I'll move on and go to my next part or my next paint or whatever. So I'm just trying to explain it the best way that I can, not exactly knowing what I'm doing. So I hope that helps. Now, when I set this away like this and push it away from me, I'm looking at it differently. I'm looking at it not, you know, super close up. I'm literally looking at it as it looks. And sometimes I'll even squint my eye to see how it's coming along. So those are my tips for painting. And as you watch these last few minutes, I hope that it starts to come together for you. And I hope that, you know, my technique, as, I don't know, varied as it is, makes some sort of sense. see if I can get back in there. I don't know, because I'm not seeing the screen, but I hope you're doing well, and talk to you next time.